Wow, thank you, thank you. And thank you for having me at this amazing event. Didn't you just love Richard Florida's speech this morning? I was really inspired by that, and maybe some of that will come through in my talk. Now, the chair, as Shamu maybe told you, because I could only understand a little bit of it from backstage, so I have no idea what you told about, which beans you spilled, and which things you kept discreetly away from these people. Now, the chair that I teach at, it was originally called Design and Politics. It was actually set up by the Dutch Minister for the Environment because she had the feeling that us architects, or this community of architects that as an architectural historian I also count myself to belong to, has no idea about politics, is incredibly naive and uninformed about politics. At the same time, when she took her proposal to Delft University to say, hey, I want to plant a mole in your university to indoctrinate you with politics. That's not exactly how she formulated it, by the way. The dean of the university said, that's great, because I have the idea that politicians are completely naive about design, have no idea what design is and what architects do and how fantastic it is. So what you could already see at the inception of my chair, there was this mutual misunderstanding, this mutual ignorance. Now, the first thing that I did when I started, when I was the first one to I suppose, sit on this chair, is to change the name, to not call it Design and Politics anymore, but to call it Design as Politics. How do I forgot something. How do I go to the next slide? I thought that things are so modern here, I just do. How do I do that? Is there a
I guess there
pointer?
is.
No?
Good question.
Good
It's something
question.
I'll have to figure out.
Because my point was actually that design, things become interesting if you start seeing politics as a form of design. That you see the politician just as creatively, or just as much as a creator, as a creative person, as the architect. And the other way around, maybe more importantly for the people who I address in my chair, is that to see architecture and urban planning as a form of politics. Why? Because basically, when you do architecture and you do urban planning, you basically wonderful. This looks like kind of a retro. I wish everything still looked like this. And where do I point? Oh, there it is. To say that. But why is design always political, architectural and urban design? You're basically always spending other people's money, and you're basically always invading public space. You're basically always making choices for what to do with not just public money or private money, but you're making choices that will affect thousands, 10,000s of people without necessarily having consulted them one by one. Now, of course, to say that design is political is not a very original thing. I mean, town planning and politics are so very much intertwined in history. For example, if you look at the planning for Washington by L'Enfant in the late 18th century, you can see that the plan of Washington is basically a pedagogical diagram for how the American democratic system works, with one axis from the legislative branch, from the Congress, crossing the axis of the executive branch, at the end of which stands the White House. And then the entire city around it, you fly over it. Imagine flying over it in 1800, in your Montgolfier or as a bird. You would immediately understand the ideal of American democracy. But at the same time, and maybe more pointedly so, urban planning becomes political when people start rioting against it. If you see, these are the Gezi Park riots or protests turned into riots by the police, actually. The Gezi Park protests in Istanbul a few years back, you remember those? What were these riots about? These riots were against, these protests were against a building project. They were against a secular public space, Taksim Square, and with its Gezi Park part, being filled in by private companies supported by the Erdogan government. He wanted to rebuild the Ottoman barracks there, in which would then house a combination of a shopping mall and a mosque, thereby taking away a huge part of the secular urban space of Istanbul, thereby creating or triggering heavy protests throughout the entire city. Now, not just the city, people, hundreds of thousands of people from the country, from the entire country, nearly 1 million people joined these protests. Were these people really all so deeply committed to saving Taksim Square, this square designed in the 1930s? Were they really so obsessed with this square that they wanted to risk their lives, literally, to save it? Were all of them such fans of urban planning, of quality of space, that they wanted to fight the police to save it? Was that really their only goal? No. Maybe some of those people had never been to Taksim Square, who knows? The reason is that here an urban planning project becomes a symbol or an example of heavy-handed authoritarian government actions. And that is what the people protest against. And this is a pattern that you see in many places. The fact that that urban planning is always about much more than just the place or the space or the building or the heritage or it becomes, you could say, the totem of politics. It becomes that one object on which the politics converge. And so if the people are not happy with the politics, they will converge. They often need a building project to converge on and to protest against, because that, in fact, then balloons into a protest against the way that they are being governed in general. In Germany, not a country well known for its heavy street fighting, its riots, its protests against the government, etc. Also Germany, the city of Stuttgart, the city officials wanted to enlarge and build a massive project around its train station. The citizens of Stuttgart did not want it. A small group of activists more or less gathered a force of people behind them to protest against this project. The reaction of the Bundesregierung, so the federal government of Germany, was so heavy-handed and arrogant. They said, train stations are not of the county, are not of the land, so are not of the province, but are of the federal government. You guys can protest what you want, it's none of your business, train stations are federal, we're going through anyway. This then worsened the conflict even further until it was actually even was able to stop the project. And again here, were these people, did they find this project? Actually, it looks very nice. It was a very, very good project by some of the best architects of Germany. A seriously good project. Were they really also against this project? No. They were protesting against how local government was being overridden by federal government, with as a symbol the project, this little bit of architecture. The same happened in Rio, where the people of Rio de Janeiro protested against the building of enormous football stadiums for the World Cup, while they said at the same time the government is running seriously behind with providing us hospitals, schools, etc., safety, security. Again here, the building becomes a kind of a provocation to the people who are unhappy with the kind of, you could say, one-sided dialogue in which the governments and architects are talking to the community. Now, architects, this is a Dutch architect, just to make myself vulnerable. This is one of our more famous exports, the CCTV building by Rem Koolhaas in the city of Beijing. Now, when this building was built in this country, in this communist country, in this autocratic country, the architects themselves believed in a very sincere way, I think, I know, I talked to them, that the building itself, due to its structure, due to its performance, due to its spaces, due to the spaces that it creates for people to go through the building and meet each other, that it might introduce just a kind of a little injection of civic accessibility, of transparency, maybe of democracy in this country that was gradually, always gradually changing, maybe for the better, in a system that is very autocratic, top-down, technocratic, oppressive, a police state, we could say, sometimes. Maybe this building would introduce a little bit of opening up, because we are talking about the building of the central China, the central Chinese state television. So the architects wrote in their brief, the many publicly accessible functions of the new building program point towards a possible democratization of the institution. And in that way, we in the Netherlands, we were relieved. Like, oh good. So Rem Koolhaas isn't selling out to the Chinese government. No, he's making it better. You know, we Dutch people, we always think that we are making things better. At the same time, however, in China, I mean, these ideas were sincere. At the same time in China, however, something else was going on. There was a certain context. A context of an ever-rising number of incidents of social unrest. There is no country in the world, even relative to the population, where social unrest is so huge, so big, where it happens all the time. Nearly 200,000 incidents of social unrest that are recorded by the official institutions are measured every year, and it's going up, as you can see on this graph. At the same time, so the Chinese government has developed a policy of repressing or stopping this social unrest. One of the 5 major points of the Chinese Communist Party and the government to stop social unrest is to step up the efforts to indoctrinate the Chinese people, to make them believe that there is nothing to be unhappy about, to take away the possible triggers in the media that might cause them to stand up and protest, to indoctrinate them. In that context, precisely as part of that policy, it was decided to professionalize, to optimize the media performance of the Chinese government. And one of its major tools for that was, of course, the central state television. And so part of that optimization, of that professionalization, that maybe employs hundreds of thousands of techies from all over the world to optimize the indoctrination, to create an indoctrination method for the 21st century. You know, the best technological solutions from Silicon Valley combined with the indoctrination ideology of the Chinese government could create something amazing. And that amazing thing also needs a building, and that building was built by Rem Koolhaas of OMA. While the architect believes sincerely that due to the spaces of his building, he is introducing ideas of democracy, what is happening maybe outside of those spaces, of those open, accessible spaces, the building is basically a machine for indoctrination. Now, another building in China, in Hong Kong, by Norman Foster, built 15, 20 years ago, I think. And it was a little bit younger. And the architect, you could say, explained the building to the people of Hong Kong by saying, the building does not just take space away from the city, it also adds a real civic space in this tropical city. It adds a space because the building is lifted up, and underneath the building you have this beautiful, shaded, luxurious square, a new urban square, a civic square where people can come together. Of course, it's still privately owned, but to all purposes, it is a civic square. Now, when the umbrella movement started, the umbrella movement, as you know, it's the protest of the Hong Kong people who protest against the Chinese government to you could say, to force a new administrator on them, while they say, no, we want to really have a democratic choice about who governs Hong Kong. When the umbrella movement, because they protested with umbrellas, while singing a song from Les Miserables, it's beautiful, beautiful Chinese form of protest. This song is called Do You Hear the People Sing? And it is also a song in Les Miserables, of course. Everybody has seen this musical. In Les Miserables, this is the song when the people of Paris protest against the oppressor. The umbrella movement used this civic square as their main campground. This is where they came together, pitched their tents, etc. And then, of course, the owners of the building said, that looks messy. We don't want that. Out with them. So here you can see exactly these ideas. There's an ideal within the architecture community of the architecture of openness and transparency and democracy. But sometimes often these ideals clash with the reality of politics. And then more often than not, the architect is on the side of the system, or is so naive that he doesn't really know what the effects of his architecture will do, or he is. And then these strange things happen. Now, another thing what is interesting about this umbrella movement is this. The umbrella movement was not just about, again here, urban spaces played a very important role. This, for example, is the forecourt of an important government building in Hong Kong, and this really is public space, so it's not owned by anyone private, it's owned by the city. And this is where they chose to make one of their permanent protests. And then a group of them managed to get in, then the square was closed off by the police, then this group that had managed to get in kind of tried to stay there. The police formed a circle around them, while the hundreds of thousands of other protesters remained behind the fences, shouting encouragement to them from there. So you could say they are the avant-garde, trying to make their point in the face of the governors who they say they are not listening to us. Now, interestingly enough, this is a kind of a mystical, nearly a resonance across the ages. The image above is Hong Kong, 2014. The image below is 1904, or something like that, in a Swiss village. And actually these villages in Switzerland still vote in that way. Switzerland is the only member they are not a member, maybe that's why. They are the only part of Europe where this direct democracy is so deeply ingrained in the system, where it is basically the system. So every couple of months, the citizens come together in their village, an avant-garde group is in the middle, then the whole community stands around them. The group in the middle of the circle, they say, what do we do about this? Do we do that or that? Then the people in the larger circle stick up their hands until somewhere in the 1970s, only the guys, I'm afraid. And in that way, they govern themselves. So if you look at the, so in this way you can see that democracy is not just an institutional thing that gets given to us, like in Washington, that gets given to us with great diagrams and great institutions. It is not even an urban form that gets given to us. There is something emergent, something nearly in our DNA as a community that somehow seems to produce these forms of democracy. And I mean forms in a literal way. Here you can see Tahrir Square in Cairo, same circle. I won't dwell too much on that. I'm not a phenomenologist. On the other hand, so that's one part of the story. On the other hand, what we can see, and I think I heard some things said by Shamu, and I think that has something to do with this. This is the kind of privatization of democratic control, the privatization of the control and the governance of our cities. There's something strange going on, because of course these two mayors, both of them were elected democratically. We see the blonde guy is Boris Johnson, the other guy is Michael Bloomberg, the by now, mayor of New York City, and the soon-to-be ex-mayor of London, two of the most successful cities in the world. And the interesting thing of these guys is they are, to all purposes, democratically elected governors. At the same time, the way that they behave, the way that they run their cities, they use all the language, the norms, the criteria. They even say it literally that they are CEOs of their cities. They run their city as if they are businesses, businesses that need to compete with one another, businesses that have to attract the best people, attract the best talent, kind of filter away the not so good talent to make the city worth more and more and more on the stock markets. So they are supported by an ideology of anti-state books that say mayors should rule the world. Cities are much better because cities are forced to compete, and that is why they always choose for the talented. So what you can see here is an idea of governance that is businessified. Businessified, is that a word? Could it be a word? It is an idea of politics that is all about the energy of the CEO and the success of the city on a competitive market of cities. But this is still kind of playing with a form. It is democratically elected mayors and public money kind of flirting, playing with the form of the business, playing with the idea that they could be a CEO, which would then mean, of course, that they would earn 100 times as much as they actually do, but still you could play at being a CEO. But on the other hand, there are things going on where you don't need the mayor playing at being a CEO anymore. This is Sheldon Adelson. Sheldon Adelson is one of the big casino tycoons, media tycoons in America. He owns half of Las Vegas. He's also one of the biggest donors of the Republican Party. And this is one of his recently aborted, very relieved to say, project for Madrid, where he wanted to buy an enormous part of Madrid and call it Euro Vegas. Within this part of Madrid, all the Spanish very, very strict union laws would not, none of the civic laws of Spain would count. Even some of the criminal law would have to kind of be suspended because you don't want people to look too critically at what happens with money and taxation in Euro Vegas. The money he would then pay to the Madrid government would kind of fill their gigantic hole in their budget, on which they were nearly going bankrupt. And but in order for that, he would buy his own private city. Now, another very interesting one for you guys, for the tech interested, is New Songdo. What they say, a city in a box. A city completely privately developed. The first one is being realized right now in Korea. And the city is basically, it's a completely private city. And the interesting thing about it, its unique selling point, is its ubiquity. Cisco Systems sees this as their biggest opportunity to roll out a whole system of what they call telepresence, ubiquitous computing, etc., meaning that all the children in New Songdo will, in a bracelet, will have a chip. So you will always know, has the Filipino maid really dropped her off at the daycare center? You would be able to, on your smartphone, to switch between getting a yoga lesson from your tutor who maybe lives in Beijing and checking if your child is actually playing with the right girls in the playground. The whole city is built around the most dense system of ubiquity that would ever be realized, provided by Cisco Systems. So the interesting thing here, the real city, the brick city, well, there's hardly a brick to be known there, but the physical city is nearly only a kind of an excuse to roll out this data city. Another thing is this, and here things become really interesting. This is Paul Romer, who says, how can we help developing countries or underdeveloped countries develop? But they don't have the right rules. Their governance is bad. Let us build charter cities inside those developing countries. He's there in there helped by Mark Klugman, a former speechwriter of Ronald Reagan. And they are now rolling out this idea of charter cities, leap zones, also called startup cities. The idea is that due to the logic of entrepreneurship, you could implant entirely privatized cities in a country, and then you would and these cities, they would be known for the uniqueness and the quality of their rules and their governance system. So you would have the same kind of stability of governance as you would have in the Netherlands, London, Budapest, Copenhagen, but it would be in a completely privatized it would be a completely privatized deliverable in the form of a city to this country. Because they say, what if politics could progress at the pace of technology? That is the idea. So politics, not as a moral thing or an ethic thing or something that comes from the people, but politics as an application. Good politics delivers good performances, attracts the right businesses, attracts talent, makes us all, drags us all into the creative class. Of course, the people of Honduras, that is one of the places where they started to do it, were not happy about this. They said, because one of these things of the code of the city was that protests will be limited to a specially designated zone. So you can see here how it creeps up, how these things have a tendency to creep up. Now, another one was Saakashvili in Georgia. It was trying to build one on a swamp on the Black Sea. Didn't go through. So now I'd like to, because I'm talking much too long as Shamu. I could also ignore him, but that would be rude. There is a tendency, of course, what can we now, we go back to where I started this talk with these people who protest, these people who don't take it anymore, these people who don't believe, etc. There is a tendency right now, especially in developed countries, to say we are going to cut ourselves off. We are going to go off-grid. We don't believe in this heavily commercialized, etc., privatized cities anymore. We are going off-grid. A little bit like Tolstoy in the 19th century, Kropotkin a little bit later. We are doing this too. This is in Detroit, hipster, agricultural, urban agriculture, etc. Jobbik could be called that, maybe not so hipster. What you can see is a way that people are trying to, that the central role of government, we have always seen in one line politics and government, that the state and politics is the same thing, that if things need to be run in a democratic way, it will have to be the state that we elect to govern that. Right now you can see the state retreating from the running of cities, and you can see people filling it in. You can see completely autonomous corporate privatized developments. That's the stuff that's going on the right at the top. You can see the democratic government themselves trying to behave like corporations with Bloomberg and Johnson. That's the top left. And then you can see the hippies, the anarchists, the the hipsters, etc., trying to cut themselves off, going off-grid, drifting away from the system, saying we are going to make a new world ourselves. That's happening on the bottom right. But the thing that I'm interested in, I'd like to use 2 more minutes. Is that okay, Shamu?
Well, we're close to 30, so...
you know, and I'd like to give you a couple to me, very, very small, very low-tech, maybe hopeless, but still very interesting attempts at people who come from this movement of resistance, of criticism, and they are not trying to start all over again on the edge, but they're trying to, you could say, reboot the system from within, to try and re-establish this civic responsibility, to re-establish notions of solidarity, that we used to need the state for, but maybe the state now is not so interested in anymore. This is how the Dutch used to treat immigrants or asylum seekers. They built, this is for the Moluccans that came in the 1950s and 60s to the Netherlands. They built an entire housing area for them, of course in the style of the 60s. Now nobody is let in anymore. Anybody who does manage to get in is put on the street and waited before they get deported. And now you have the squatters of Amsterdam who are kind of using their infrastructure to create new houses, but also new homes, new centers, schools even, hospitals for these people who are out on the streets in the Netherlands. The government does not want to spend any money on them, and the squatter infrastructure is now trying to provide a service to asylum seekers that the Dutch government does not want to give anymore, in a squatted church in this case. Another one is, and that's my last example, another one is from Russia. In Moscow you used to have more than 400 public libraries. These libraries are maybe the last bit of really civic space in the city of Moscow. These libraries, however, they all look like this, completely shut down. There's one woman who might be employed by them, but she never opens the door. 400 of them standing around the city, like this. The last bit of public space. The office of Svesmi, a Moscow and Rotterdam-based office, has said, if we could, it's all there already. It's just that nobody believes in it anymore. Everybody says, no, people don't read books anymore, etc. They said, why don't we try and bottom up, one by one, reopen these libraries, re-educate the people who live there, literally open them up, give books, people who throw away books, bring the books to the libraries, and let's try and one by one reboot this dormant system that used to be part of this Russian state presence. And so it's literally a matter of turning on the lights. I'd like to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.